Okay. Boa tarde a todos. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. We will start soon. Vamos começar em breve. Okay. Okay. We already reached 100 participants. Já chegamos aos 100. So let's start officially. So boa tarde. Good afternoon. We will have, this event will be in English, but we will have an introduction part in Portuguese. So I will just switch a bit to Portuguese before we introduce our speaker. O nosso evento vai decorrer em inglês, mas temos aqui uma parte introdutória em português, por isso eu vou aqui agora mudar um pouco de inglês para português, mas esta parte queremos então fazer em português. Sejam bem-vindos ao webinário Introduction to the Green Comp. E estamos aqui muito honrados de ter a nossa palestrante Ulrike Pisiotes conosco. Queria aqui relembrar que o evento está a ser gravado e também, está a passar em streaming no canal da YouTube da Rede Campo Sustentável. Meu nome é Antje Diesterheft, eu sou investigadora no CENSE, na nova FCT, na Faculdade de Ciências e Tecnologia da Universidade Nova de Lisboa, e hoje represento aqui a Rede Campo Sustentável, onde faço parte da Comissão Executiva e tenho o prazer de moderar esta sessão. Então, é com muito prazer e entusiasmo que abrimos com este webinário uma série de eventos relacionados com a educação para a sustentabilidade, com o foco no desenvolvimento de competências dos docentes e adaptação dos currícula. E então, antes de introduzir a nossa palestrante, a Ulrike Pisiotes, e de lhe passar a palavra, gostaríamos de só fazer um enquadramento curto sobre esta iniciativa. E assim agradeço ao professor Gomes Martins, que é o cofundador da Rede Campo Sustentável e também membro da área sectorial da organização e representação da RCS, de explicar brevemente como surgiu esta ideia dos pontos de encontro. Professor, passo-lhe a palavra.
Obrigado, Antje. Eu queria saudar todos, boa tarde a todos, e dar conta eventualmente para um auditório relativamente grande como temos hoje, haverá pessoas que não fazem parte da rede e que eventualmente não conhecerão tanto a rede quanto as pessoas que já fazem parte. Eu gostava só de dar conta de que a Rede Campo Sustentável é uma plataforma de cooperação entre pessoas que fazem parte das comunidades de ensino superior portuguesas, também alguns estrangeiros, nomeadamente falantes de português, mas é digamos assim, uma plataforma de colaboração em que, no essencial, partilhamos experiências na perspectiva das iniciativas ligadas à sustentabilidade no ensino superior, perdão, e procuramos influenciar os órgãos de governo das instituições no sentido positivo, na perspectiva de desenvolverem e promoverem práticas e políticas para o desenvolvimento sustentável no âmbito das estratégias do ensino superior. E, portanto, nesse contexto, uma das coisas que a nós nos motiva de uma forma muito central é exatamente promover a cooperação entre instituições de ensino superior, no sentido de elas cooperarem entre si para objetivos comuns, com base em projetos comuns que promovam a sustentabilidade. E daí ter surgido esta iniciativa em concreto, que é, digamos assim, com uma designação muito genérica de pontos de encontro, exatamente porque suscita a ideia de criarmos pontos em que, ou se quisermos, núcleos em torno dos quais as instituições se organizem de uma forma, digamos assim, cooperativa para atingir objetivos comuns. Portanto, como essa é uma das vertentes mais importantes da rede de campo sustentável, resolvemos formalizá-la sob esta figura dos pontos de encontro. E o primeiro tema, os pontos de encontro são temáticos, não é? E, portanto, o primeiro tema que pensámos propor às instituições foi este, o do desenvolvimento de competências dos docentes e da alteração dos currículos dos cursos, no sentido de incluírem nas suas práticas pedagógicas e nos conteúdos curriculares temas relativos ao desenvolvimento sustentável. Portanto, como essa ideia foi lançada sob a forma de desafio a um conjunto de instituições que foram signatárias do documento de compromisso com a sustentabilidade que a rede promoveu já há vários anos. E hoje temos, de facto, 13 instituições de ensino superior nacionais, desde universitárias e politécnicas públicas e privadas, portanto é um conjunto alargado de instituições, que se organizaram, respondendo ao desafio da rede, se organizaram para promoverem esta iniciativa em concreto. Este ponto de encontro, antes talvez possamos avançar, este ponto de encontro já decorreu em duas instâncias, digamos assim, anteriores, em que basicamente foram preparadas por uma decisão de um encontro da rede de campo sustentável de promover os pontos de encontro e digamos que a decisão foi formalmente tomada no encontro da rede de 2022 e depois houve duas reuniões preparatórias daquilo que estamos a começar hoje, não é? Na primeira reunião preparatória surgiu ou foi constituído um grupo ad hoc que é constituído pelas seguintes colegas: a Custódia Drummond, da Universidade da Madeira, a Paula Moraes, da Universidade Portugalense, Ana Carla Madeira, da Faculdade de Engenharia da Universidade do Porto, a Antje Disterheft, da Nova, ou do Sense da Nova, digamos assim, e o Vitor Manteigas, do Politécnico de Lisboa. E estes colegas têm vindo a dinamizar a concretização de iniciativas que decorrem das decisões das reuniões deste primeiro ponto de encontro, e é com isso que estamos a começar hoje. Talvez próximo slide, Antje. Na reunião, na segunda reunião, aquilo que surgiu foi uma proposta aprovada pelas 13 instituições que agora estão a dinamizar este processo, que é um roteiro, digamos assim, é um conjunto de iniciativas que estão programadas e que se destinam a concretizar, digamos, a dar corpo a este conteúdo concreto de dinamizar, digamos assim, o aperfeiçoamento ou a criação de competências novas nos docentes, tendo em vista também a alteração de currícula para a introdução do desenvolvimento sustentável na prática pedagógica, não é? E o que esse roteiro contém é, basicamente, este próprio webinário que estamos, ou conferência pela colega Ulrica Piziotis, a que se segue numa lógica de 2 acontecimentos por semestre, não é? A que se segue uma iniciativa que provavelmente ocorrerá em abril, portanto estamos a prepará-la ainda, não é? Que é o ensino para o desenvolvimento sustentável, dedicado ao pessoal docente. E depois a ideia também é criar um repositório público aberto de recursos que permitam a exploração de recursos propriamente ditos, no sentido de influenciar e informar adequadamente a prática pedagógica. E depois daí para diante, depois destes 2 primeiros eventos, dos quais hoje estamos no primeiro, não é? E da criação do repositório, que também tem um grupo de trabalho próprio para o constituir, seguir-se-ão então 2 eventos por semestre, que já estão basicamente preparados, os 2 primeiros com a Universidade da Madeira e a Faculdade de Engenharia do Porto, no sentido de partilharmos entre a comunidade do ensino superior em Portugal práticas concretas de prática pedagógica incluindo a sustentabilidade e de alterações curriculares no sentido da introdução do tema da sustentabilidade no ensino, no ensino superior. E, portanto, no essencial é disto que se trata. Hoje estamos com a primeira instância deste roteiro, não é? Com esta conferência proferida pela Ulrika Pisiotis, to whom I thank very much the availability for being with us today. So thank you very much, and it's that. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, professor, e obrigada por este enquadramento. E reforço aqui aos nossos participantes, ou à audiência, de participarem também nos futuros eventos desta série dos Pontos de Encontro e, por favor, sigam então as informações que partilhamos na Rede Campo Sustentável. And now I would like to turn to English. Sorry, Ulrike, for having this part first in Portuguese. I want to welcome you once again to this first meeting point of this Portuguese Network Sustainable Campus. And when we were discussing in the ad hoc group that Professor Gomes Martins was just mentioning when we were preparing all these like kind of roadmap of events, and when we were discussing in our small ad hoc group how to best proceed with activities related to education for sustainable development competences, it was a kind of natural and obvious for me to invite Ulrike, with whom I have collaborated before on a similar topic, and who we in the group considered the perfect match to kick off this event series on ESD competences for educators and for curricular renewal. So, and we understand educators in a really broad sense. It's not only maybe the people hired as professors, but also researchers are often involved in teaching activities. So it's an understanding of educators in a broad sense. And we believe the Green Comp is a very important fundament to develop our further activities. And so it's for us a pleasure having you here. Thank you for your availability. And I want to share also a few words about you. So let me please read here a short biography of Ulrike. Ulrike Pisiotis, she is a policy officer at the European Commission, and she works there in the Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture on policy development and to make sustainability a core priority in education systems across Europe. She is also one of the co-authors of the Green Comp, which is this sustainability competence framework, and that we found so important to develop our next events and to get the Green Comp better known also in the Portuguese higher education community. Ulrike has joined the Commission in 2009, where she has held various positions and gained extensive experience in education and research policies and systems within the European Union and beyond. Ulrike has a PhD in German literature and has previously worked in research, publishing, and teaching. Now, before passing the word to Ulrike, I just want to inform our listeners that you can use, please, the Q&A section where you can write down your questions. We will have time for discussion and answering the questions after Ulrike's presentation. And I want to thank here also my colleagues from the ad hoc group, namely Custodia Drummond, Paula Moraes, Carla Madeira, and Vito Manteigas, for helping with the Q&A section. Dear Ulrike, once again, thank you for being with us today. And please, the word is you. And I will stop sharing in order that you can start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antje, for your nice introduction, and greetings to everybody in this webinar here from Brussels. And I am going to pull up my presentation, which you can hopefully see in a second. Is that visible? Just a...
It was, now it turned again, not the presentation mode. It was presentation mode before.
Okay, I can see it in presentation mode. Okay, let me try again.
Yes, that was.
Okay, just a second. It worked perfectly during the technical check, but of course now we have a problem. Just a second. It's very slow on my side all of a sudden. Is this now in presentation mode?
No, not yet. I see it. It started first, but now we still have your notes.
Okay.
Now it is. Now it is. Now we have.
Now it is. Okay. Let's hope
it. Just a short delay.
It stays that way. Well, Antje, you have already introduced me very nicely. So yes, I work at the European Commission, and just to also mention that I actually work in the on school policy. So yes, I work on sustainability education, and sustainability is very much, and we see it very much as a lifelong learning issue. But if during my talk I have more examples from the school's context, then this is why, because yes, I work mostly with member states on school education. Perhaps just a little bit, what does it mean to do policy work at the European level? I'm sure you are very much aware that education and training policy is in the hands of the member states. So we adhere to the principle of subsidiarity, but of course that doesn't mean that there is a need and very, very much a wish also to work on common challenges, which is what we facilitate. And we also rely on data of member states' education systems. And of course, when we work with member states, our policy work and policy recommendations are very much informed by research. And one of or a good example, in fact, of such research-informed policy is the Green Comp Sustainability Competence Framework that I'm going to introduce to you. So first of all, I would like to start with a citation from the framework itself. Why do we need to talk about green or sustainability competences? I think listening to the news every day and over the years, it is very clear why everybody and at different levels, at individual and collective level, needs to develop and to improve sustainability competences. So really to have a fair and decent livelihood for all people, regenerating nature and enabling biodiversity to thrive have never been more important. And this is actually a quotation of Green Comp, which was published 2 years ago, but I think it stays relevant as the time goes on, which is really a little bit sad, but this is the reality, and it is and remains one of the most pressing duties that humanity faces. And it is actually also in education, it is also a momentum for change, because there are very many citizens, a large majority, 93% of EU citizens consider that climate change is a serious problem. So the awareness is definitely there. If we look at the young people, not only at the EU, but globally, we can see that, again, also a large majority there is actually frightened or even very frightened when they look at the future. At the same time, those young people also tell us that education at the moment fails to prepare them really to tackle climate change and especially to act on sustainability. As I said, awareness is there. We know, for example, from PISA, from the 2018 study, so not from the most recent, but from the 2018 study, that young 15-year-old students are very familiar with climate change and with global warming. At the same time, what they miss is sort of this capacity to act, the agency. So this really calls for deep and transformative and systemic change, how we can turn this awareness into action. And of course, you are aware of the European Green Deal, and the Green Com framework is also very much embedded in the European Green Deal. So the Green Deal is the EU strategy to become climate neutral by 2050. And this, of course, requires action across a range of areas, such as energy, such as the environment, such as transport, just to name a few examples. And also green competences to develop green competences and skills are crucial for a more sustainable economy and society. And in fact, the Green Deal communication from 2019 specifically mentions that a European competence framework should be developed and to help and develop, assess knowledge, skills, and attitudes on climate change and sustainable development. Now, before I come to the framework itself, I want to say a few words on green competences or skills, because we often have the question, well, is it competences or is it skill or is that the same? And it doesn't really help, of course, that both terms are often used interchangeably, especially in the English-speaking world. I would say skills are actually more used than competences. But nevertheless, at EU level, we have defined competences as a combination of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And we also speak by now that we see a shift to a so-called competence-based education, not only for sustainability, but in general, as opposed to a more content and just knowledge-based education. And when we talk about green skills, we usually mean more technical and professional capabilities, so something that is definitely labor market oriented, like here in the example, a renewable energy engineer would have specific professional skills related to that. So perhaps to sum that up, competences is really something that everybody should have, no matter if they have a job, and the foundation for that should be laid at school or even already before, whereas green skills are clearly professional skills and labor market related. So Green Comp, the Sustainability Competence Framework, is a guidance document which describes a set of sustainability competences that can help learners think, plan, and act with empathy, responsibility, and care for the planet. Here you see how the framework was developed over a little more than a year. So we first had scoping studies already at the end of 2020, and then a first proposal, and then a first workshop with experts. So the framework has really a strong scientific underpinning. It was developed with experts in sustainability education and sustainability more generally. So a couple of names that you might know also, for example, that were involved in the development are, for example, Arjen Walls or Daniela Tilbury or Stephen Sterling. And so we had a first draft of the framework, and which was then discussed and refined in and after that first expert workshop. Again, there was a lot of work going on based on that input of the workshop. Then there was a second workshop with the same experts, more or less, in September. And again, there was a refining of the framework. And then at the end of October, a stakeholder workshop with experts, but also policymakers from member states. And then finally, the publication at the beginning of January in 2022. So here you see the framework overview. It consists of 4 competence areas that relate to values and sustainability, to complexity, to futures, and to acting for sustainability. The framework at a glance, you can see again the competence areas that I just mentioned. So they are on the top there. And then each competence area is further defined by 3 concrete competences. I'm going to speak about them, so I'm not going to mention them, going to go into them right now. But what is important to note is that these competences, they are not sequential, so nobody would have to first master all the competences under embodying sustainability values before one can move on to the next. It's really, they are interrelated and not sequential. And I think what you can also already see looking at those competences, that they really try to address sustainability as a multi-dimensional concept, which refers to economic, environmental, and social aspects at the same time. This is a metaphor for Green Comp that we try to, also sort of find a good picture, a good simile for the framework and for sustainability competences. And what we thought of is that beehive, because a beehive or a bee colony is really a highly developed natural system. So the metaphor tries to highlight that interplay and the dynamics between those 4 competence areas and the 12 competences of Green Comp. And the bees, I think, also make the dynamic of the image very tangible, because they are both individuals and they act as a collective organism. So kind of what we want to also achieve with sustainability competences. Now coming to the different areas of Green Comp, I'm not going to speak, I think also for time reasons, I'm not going to speak about each and every competence, but I'm going to pick out one competence per competence area. And of course, if you have questions on other competences, I'm happy to answer them after my talk. So the competence area embodying sustainability values, I am going to pick out valuing sustainability, because sometimes we have also a misunderstanding here that there's sort of a prescription of values, but that's not really what this is about. So it doesn't mean that certain values are propagated, but what it means is that the learner should be able to reflect on personal values, on how values vary among people and also over time, and of how this relates then to sustainability. Talking about complexity in sustainability, I would like to just pick out systems thinking. And again, not because this is more important than the other competence areas, but just to give you an example. So what we mean by systems thinking is that we shouldn't assume that a given system is just the sum of its parts, but rather that it's about the interaction of its parts. So we shouldn't analyze parts in isolation, but what we need to look at are interactions, are feedback loops. I'm also picked out this particular competence because when I talk to educators, then I often hear that this is rather difficult to teach, or it's actually, it's rather a challenge, and especially, of course, as I said, I talk more to teachers in the school sector than in the higher education sector. So what we see is that when we look at school specifically, that we do see this kind of, or we do see that European education systems include in their curricula examples of systems thinking when it comes to the interaction between humans and nature across space and time, but they mostly address these questions more generally, or they either focus on geographical, so on the space, or the historical, so the time dimension. And the complex relationship between nature and human action is usually a cross-curricular theme. And so, for example, we could see that in competences related to systems thinking in primary education, include for students the ability to illustrate with concrete examples from their environment that environmental problems are often based on conflicting interests. Now, if we go back to the sort of definition that I gave you at the beginning of interconnections and feedback loops, and all these things that system thinking really comprises, then that we don't see so much. So really, this is something, like emergence, interconnectedness, cascade effects. So sort of the deeper understanding of systems thinking is, however, not really touched, at least not at school level. But even that can be taught, I think. And what I usually explain them is the tea bag example that I once saw in a book about systems thinking, which is very, very simple. So think about the tea bag that you put perhaps in your tea in the morning or in the afternoon. How is it produced? What are the working conditions? What are the environmental conditions? How is the tea being transported to wherever we live? So there are a lot of different aspects that go into that, and it's a very simple example that even kind of small children can already understand. Now, coming to the third competence area, which is about sustainable futures. So here I'm going to pick just futures literacy, because again, this is an area which is perhaps more challenging than other areas, at least again in school education. Now, what does future literacy implies? It implies that a learner can imagine and develop alternative scenarios and also identify measures that are needed to achieve a preferred sustainable future. So it means basically working backwards from a state, from a preferred state that you want to achieve, and identify the steps that are needed today to achieve this sustainable future. Now, our education systems, at least when we look at schools, again, are usually more looking at the past. We don't really have the sort of 7-generation span that is viable for talking about futures thinking. So perhaps we have maybe the next generation, but definitely not more generations. So that's actually something that is really hard, even as a human being, to just implement them, let alone for teachers in school education, who are usually not prepared to go into this kind of teaching with their students. But again, I think it's actually a crucial competence that we need to work on more, and that we need to develop the capabilities of educators. And this is just an example of lessons that the Commission Science Department, a joint research center, developed together with TED Ed, which is sort of the education branch of TEDx, which is, yes, a couple of video lessons and online lessons on futures thinking. And acting for sustainability, the last of the competence areas, well, I think individual initiative and collective action are pretty much self-explanatory. So I just want to concentrate here on political agency, which doesn't mean that somebody needs to become a politician. But what is expected here of the learner is that they can navigate the political system, identify political responsibility, and also accountability for unsustainable actions. What you can see here is how the framework is structured. So you have, in the beginning, you always have the introduction into the competence area. Then you would have the different competences described. So for example, systems thinking, a short descriptor, a short definition, and then more explanation following. And then at the end of each competence, you would have an example of what constitutes knowledge, what is skill, and what is an attitude of that competence. In the annex of the framework, there are about 180 statements of knowledge, skills, and attitudes, so about 5 per competence. But in the actual text, or in the main text, we only included 1 example. And then there's also, yes, a practice example, or of what here in this case systems thinking means. And here at the end, you can see a link to, a link to that this also refers to multiple SDGs, because what we also tried to do is to link each competence to the different sustainable development goals, because of course Green Comp didn't fall in an empty space. We had discussions about sustainability before UNESCO and the UN. They have worked on this for years and decades, and also many people, many educators work with the sustainable development goals. So for us, it was also crucial to show the links that exist between the SDGs and between Green Comp. The framework has also been translated into all official EU languages. So if you scan this little QR code, that should lead you to the website of the publications office, where you can find the publication. And then you would also find the Portuguese translation there. Now, where can we use Green Comp? It's very much, and I said this before, I think, constructed and developed with a lifelong learning approach. So it's not a framework for schools, it's not a framework for higher education, but it's a framework for all education levels. And we also know that all these different education levels, so formal education, but also non-formal education, that they have taken up Green Comp. We know of projects in youth work, in citizenship education, in citizen service. And that's also, this is how Green Comp was conceived to address all these different levels, to cater to all these different levels, which means then, of course, also at the same time, or on the other hand, that the framework is at a conceptual level. So it's a model, but if you then want to concretely apply it, for example, in early childhood education and care, you have to adapt it. You would have to adapt the language, the same for school education, or if you want to use it in vet education, maybe you want to concentrate specifically on aspects of circular economy. So, but this was the idea, to have a general framework which can then be used and adapted in different contexts. Now, this is sort of the follow-up from the previous slide. Of course, as there are so many education levels, this framework addresses equally the stakeholders that it addresses, really span the whole spectrum of education and training. And here are a few use examples that we can think of. So, for example, policy guidance, and we have seen that already in Finland, for example, or in France, that they have taken up GreenComp at a really, at the national level, and trying to formulate policy guidance on sustainability competences that feed then into curricula or programs. It can be used for self-assessment, and it is used for that. I know of quite a few projects that develop different tools for self-assessment using GreenComp. The same for assessment. Certification also, there are a number of projects that now look also to develop micro-credentials, so to develop small training modules that award the participants with micro-credentials, teaching material, training courses, and of course it also is part of research and inspires research. And what I have found, and I only looked at ResearchGate, is GreenComp has been so far, since its publication in ResearchGate, has been cited more than 180 times, but it might be more. So here I have just put 3 examples that refer to GreenComp in relation to policymakers, to primary education, and to curriculum review, but there is really a lot more out there. And just to recap a little bit the GreenComp journey that we have traveled so far and that I have spoken about. So we had the publication in 2022, and then this sort of what we cannot and also, of course, don't want to steer is the take up by stakeholders, because yes, it's our intention is to put out, let's say, a good product, and we also thought that this is needed, but then at the same time, it's still sort of an unknown. Is it really needed, and will it really be welcome? Will stakeholders want to work with that? So this has been really quite a success, I would say. So it has been taken up really at all levels of education, and it's sometimes quite overwhelming to see how much impact it has had already. And to bring those stakeholders also together and for them to exchange on green competences, we also established pretty much a year ago a community of practice on GreenComp. And if you follow the link or the QR code, it will take you to the site of the GreenComp community, which is in fact hosted on the Education for Climate Coalition platform. Perhaps some of you have heard of that already. And yes, here just a few ideas of why do we think we need community of practice. We need a forum where people and organizations that use GreenComp or work on sustainability competences can connect. So we really want this to be a place of exchange, of networking, of finding synergies, and of working together on common challenges. Now, since I started with a quote from GreenComp, I also want to end my presentation with a quote from GreenComp, which I think is very, very relevant. So systemic change cannot be achieved only through political agreements, financial incentives, or technological innovations, even though they are, of course, very, very important. That goes without saying. But also, if we want to have long-lasting change, then we need lifelong learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ulrike, for your very inspiring presentation and for sharing your knowledge and expertise experience with us. So we have already received a couple of questions. I see that people are using now the chat and not so much the Q&A section. both is fine. I believe we try to organize in the best way, and of course feel also free to put your questions in Portuguese if it's easier, and we can translate here. Okay, so maybe I would thank my colleagues. Maybe you can check the Q&A. I have already read through the chat, but maybe I can start with those in the chat, and then you can group eventually those from the Q&A. So we have, I think they are a little similar, 2 questions here from Inês Pucarinho and Rita Trindade. Ulrike, they would like, Inês would like to know if there are accessible case studies that are implementing this reference framework. You were referring already some of the publications in your latest, in the last slides. You mentioned some publications. Are you aware of concrete case studies that were?
Yes, so that's actually, yeah, that's a very good question, and I forgot to mention that. So thank you very much for the question. What I mentioned in my slide was when Green Comp is being cited in research. So it might be research about something else, but they on competences, and then they cite Green Comp. But there are also, we are aware of many projects. There are Erasmus projects, Horizon projects, or non-EU projects, of course, as well, that use Green Comp. But because there are so many, we actually at some point also said we need case studies to see where how Green Comp has been put into practice, what worked well, or why they thought they wanted to use Green Comp in the first place, and how they applied it. So we are actually now in the last phases of case study compilation that will have 12 case studies, more or less, across the whole spectrum of education. So including school education, higher education, adult learning, and precisely describing case studies of how Green Comp was used, and it should be out in maybe in the next 2 or 3 months.
Okay, thank you, Ulrike. And the other question is a little similar, but maybe also some slightly different. Rita Trindade is asking where to start these kind of topics. Is it better to opt, for example, an elective course or in compulsory courses? Or should every degree have applied options of applied sustainability? Where do you suggest to start?
Wow, it's a big question. I think what is definitely needed is that you, as an institution, have an overall understanding of how to implement sustainability. So this is not a Green Comp; it's just a tool that you can use to support your sustainability teaching or the sustainability mission in a way of the institution. So if there is a sort of overall plan that really helps. I mean, what we have seen, if there is no also policy and high level support for this agenda, then it's usually much more difficult to implement sustainability actions, because then it rests on the committed individual, which can also turn into a burden. Now, in terms of should this, I mean, what is the status quo is that across Europe, what we have seen from universities is that sustainability is an optional course in many, or an optional, segment of education, of higher education. Sometimes now some universities opt to have this as an obligatory course. Some also opt to have it sort of integrated in a transdisciplinary way, sort of making it part of different subjects. it's hard to answer that question definitely, because if you have it as an optional or even mandatory course, then you can say, okay, or then other, in a way, disciplines can say, well, it's already treated there, so we don't have to think about it. If it's across the board, that might be better, because then everybody has to think about it, but then maybe again you don't go so deep, or it's a bit tricky to answer, and also I don't really have so far any research on this, and I'm not even sure it can be conclusively answered.
Okay. Thank you, Ulrike. Now we are getting many questions. Let's see. I'm not sure if we can put all, but I try also. We have tried to group a bit. So there are questions regarding also practical examples, recommendations of pedagogies. And also, or would you suggest problem-based learning? And if you have, maybe if you could elaborate on a concrete example.
Yes, so definitely what we say is problem-based learning, learner-centered education, for sure, and yes, using real-life experience instead of using sort of constructed only theoretical approaches, so that the learners can really see how sustainability plays out in practice, and the changes that you can achieve. So that's definitely that these are definitely very valid pedagogical approaches. I don't have one single example now that I can present, but again, once we have the case studies that look into this very, very concretely and step by step, we will also know more how this has played out in practice, in fact.
Yeah, thank you. I think we are all looking forward to that compilation of the case studies. Then Marta Santos Silva is asking, would it be possible to hear from you whether there is any ongoing or planned initiative by the European Commission to make the integration of sustainability-oriented syllabus compulsory in European universities? And she's thanking you.
No, it's and this is also not our mandate. So again, education and training is the responsibility of the member states. There is nothing that the European Commission can oblige member states to make that compulsory. And also, again, universities are again more autonomous than schools usually in the different member states. So what we do is we give recommendations and we try to sort of bring member states together, and also by sort of comparative reports or so to see how other member states progress, but no, there are no plans, because there cannot be any such plans to make it compulsory from our side, but we hope, of course, that member states. So I didn't mention that, I think, but we also had a recommendation for learning for the green transition and sustainable development, which we proposed as the Commission, and which was then taken up and adopted by the member states in June 2022. And that means that all the EU member states really committed to make sustainability education a priority in their education and training systems. And this recommendation is a policy guidance which has many recommendations at the system level, at the level of institutions, at the level of learners and of educators. So it's like a catalog of things that should and could be done to advance sustainability education. And all member states have adopted this, so they all subscribe to what is written in that recommendation.
Yeah. Thank you. Now I'm grouping here also some of the questions. Vera, for example, would like to know if the European Union or the Commission, the member countries, what are the mechanisms of communication between European Union or the Commission and the members to monitor and support the use of the Green Comp? And maybe similar, here's also another question of if this might become a quality, where was it? A label for a quality framework. Yeah, let me see. Now I forgot. So the question was if this could, yes, here, so one question, but I think they're a little bit linked, is if there will be some idea on monitoring on the Green Comp, and if the Green Comp may become a new quality label for study programs, maybe like similar to what happens in translation study programs. So these are the two questions from Vera and Sandra.
Yes, thank you for the questions. So first of all, Green Comp is a voluntary, or is a tool that we put out for member states to be used on a voluntary basis. So in that sense, we don't speak about implementation and monitoring when it comes to Green Comp use, but at the same time, of course, we work closely with the member states. What we have are so-called working groups where we regularly meet with representatives of the education ministries of all the member states, also from social partners like teacher unions, and other associations. So they come together in working groups where we address common challenges, and there are different working groups. So there's a higher education working group, one in VET, which actually focuses only on green VET, one or actually two in school education, and one of them in school education deals again with learning for sustainability. It's the one that I am running together with my colleague. So there we also, of course, make competences a theme and a topic, and we share, or member states share their experiences, share with us and we with them what works and what doesn't, and how Green Comp has been put into practice in different contexts. So this is one way. And then to the second question, I mean, I would certainly be very happy if Green Comp became sort of a standard, or I don't know what the exact word was that you used for education programs, but it's again, I think it's again something that different projects are already looking into, or sort of taking Green Comp and then developing programs based on the framework. But it's not something that I think we would push from our side because of the question of subsidiarity.
Yeah, thank you, Ulrike. And I hope it is okay that we go over like for 2 minutes. I think then we will manage to answer all the questions. And I would also like to ask my colleagues to check if there is some question that I have not put here, yes, to help me here to check through if there is something urgent that I missed. But I would like to ask here now the question from Carla, and I think then we can take 1 or 2 more. From Carla Sofia Farinha, who is asking, how do you see the leverage between the society and schools, universities regarding transdisciplinary approaches for a circular economy? And if you have any examples, she would also appreciate any example.
I'm not sure I understand the question entirely. What do we mean by leverage?
I believe maybe to support the direction of to support. I would understand the question maybe to how to help maybe speeding up the development of transdisciplinary approaches for a circular economy, maybe using also the Green Comp approach. The competence-based approach.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm it's a little bit difficult for me to make the connection between schools and higher education in that sense. I am aware of actually a couple of especially VET projects that take Green Comp and specifically try to use it for the circular economy approach and to come up with specific teaching material on circular economy issues that are based on Green Comp. Also, I'm aware of a Horizon project that looks actually at different Green Deal areas. So it looks at the different policy areas and at the same time also uses the Green Comp competences and then defines, again, teaching material, training courses, stuff like that. And circular economy would also be one of them, of course. Now, speaking from my experience as a policy maker in school education, it is rather difficult to, or it is just not, at the moment, it is not happening so much to have a transdisciplinary or cross-curricular approach. So school education is still very much subject-oriented. It's also very much an affair where you have, which is very, you have the one teacher and the class, but not so much team teaching or, yes, cross-curricular exchange is not really happening in practice. And of course, this happens because curricula are usually very full. They tend to get fuller and fuller. We tend to add things instead of, looking at perhaps what is maybe not so relevant anymore. So these are, of course, difficult decisions. They are also very political and politicized decisions sometimes. So in that sense, it is perhaps easier for higher education institutions, which have a lot more autonomy to actually practice and implement such a transdisciplinary approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Thank you. I think this is now the last question, and then I think we need to close. But here's one question regarding attitudes, and this, as we didn't have a question yet, I think this could be also of interest to other listeners. So Senan Gardine is asking if there is an example of attitude for futures literacy, where learners are expected to be aware that the project consequences on self and community may influence the preference for certain scenarios above others. So if you have eventually, what attitudes towards the future have you considered? If then the Green Comp is something about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned that a little bit, sort of the long-term thinking that we usually don't apply so much, neither as individuals in our daily life, nor as, I mean, we think about if we have children, then we think about them and we think about perhaps their children. But if you really want to talk about futures thinking, you would span that like over 7 generations, and to go from there and think how would my actions today influence those generations. But it also actually works backward, looking how past generations have influenced the state that we are in now, but also in a positive way, meaning sometimes for sustainability, it's well worth looking at past generations and how they what solutions they might have already found, and perhaps or in what way they were already sustainable that we might have forgotten nowadays, and where we try to find solutions that may already be there. So futures thinking, in a way, is, maybe we should have more called it I don't know, long-term generational thinking or something like that. But of course, it's not such a catchy title. So but just to say that it's about the future, but also learning from the past.
Thank you. I think this was very inspiring to hear also your answers and to your reflections. And thank you for elaborating on these very different types of questions. if my colleagues find any important question that still should be answered, let me quickly know. Otherwise, I want here to thank again Ulrike for her time. I want to thank also all listeners for joining today this first event of the Meeting Point series, the Pontos de Encontro. We are already in touch with our next guests and are planning the next sessions for April and May, so please stay tuned. And I also want to leave here again an invitation in Portuguese for those who are living in or who are working in Portugal. Por favor, vejam também a página da Rede Campo Sustentável, e para quem quiser se juntar aos grupos de trabalho, pode também ver aí na página os grupos. Temos 9 grupos de trabalho sobre diversos temas e estamos sempre abertos a receber novas pessoas. So this was just an invitation here for our working groups, and we welcome always newcomers and people who want to join. Is there any other important question? Otherwise,
Bye-bye. Everything's fine.
Okay, this was not for us, I believe. So I want now to take this opportunity also to thank my colleague from the ad hoc group and also the executive commission of the Rede Campo Sustentável, who helped preparing and organizing this event. And I want to also to give a special thank you to Manuel Barros, who designed the communication materials, and a special thank you to Vitor Manteigas, who took care of the technical setup, the registration, and turning the planned Zoom session into a webinar to accommodate all interested parties. So a big thank you again to all, and another very special thank you to you, Ulrike. I hope we can keep in touch, and I'm sure there could be eventually interest in developing a special professional development based on the Green Comp for educators, in order that we can maybe all get more training how to implement those competences, or to shift more to a competence-based education instead of knowledge-based, or a complementation to knowledge-based education. So once again, thank you and goodbye. See you next time.